Put the whoosy on the whatsy. Attach the whatsy to the whoosy. Connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit.
Good morning, everybody. I'm back in Topanga Dice, and I'm going to do another round of answering questions. It's kind of the quickest, easiest way for me to just get something up. I haven't had a chance to do another full-on thingamajig, so we'll do this. And this week I'm going to have a bunch more time. I'll be home all week, and so I'm going to try and do a bunch of stuff this week that I can just bring with me when we take off again, and I'll be able to edit them up and upload them each week. So yeah, some fun stuff coming up. I've been, getting stuff, gathering stuff up at Barefoot, and getting things together, do some interesting things. So hopefully they'll be interesting. We did an amazing round of promo and playing shows and stuff. Me and Sagan just chasing Mom around. And it was really cool. We did some in-store stuff. She did a bunch of shows, a bunch of radio promos. She did the Grand Ole Opry, which was just totally amazing. So a bunch of really cool stuff happened this over the last 2 weeks or so. And it was fun to get out there and start really sharing this new record of hers with everybody, and get reactions and see how people are reacting to the record. So it was cool. We had a great time. It was kind of grueling. It was, we were just, all over the place. And it's different than traveling on a bus where you can, at least you're sort of settled in the bus, like every day there was just planes and hotels and trains and whatever, so it's a lot. And, Sagan is an incredible trooper. He is just up for whatever, and just is just in it with us, and does amazing. But man, it's a lot, and we leave a trail of baby bottles and stuff, that everything that we lose along the way. but we survived. We're back, and I thought I would mention one quick thing. It was super cool. It happened yesterday. I think I may have mentioned or posted on my social media, whatever stuff, that we have this friend who is an actual real astronaut. this woman named Jessica Muir, and she's absolutely incredible. And she, we've known her for a few years now, and she finally, got launched to the International Space Station. So she is on the International Space Station right now. And a couple weeks ago, Grace, got a call. Her phone rang. It was a phone number she didn't recognize, and so she didn't pick it up. And then afterwards, checked the voicemail, and it was Jessica calling from the International Space Station, saying, "This is the International Space Station calling. You should pick up your phone." And so the next time she called was yesterday, and so we got to talk to her while she's on the space station, and it was really incredible. She's having an amazing time. She could not, emphasize enough that it's far more incredible and amazing and mind-blowing than she ever even imagined it would be, with all the training and preparation and all the, time spent really sort of imagining what it would be like to be in outer space. It's just totally mind-blowing. So it was really fun to talk to her. We got to hear a little bit about the launch and what it's like being in space, and how it's, sort of disorienting at first because your brain is used to orienting yourself based on the direction of gravity. And so, she had done tons of training on the mock-up of the International Space Station, which is in Houston. It's a 1-to-1 mock-up. It's essentially everything they build two of, that goes up there, and one of them sits in Houston, and it's all put together in this gigantic warehouse. And so you can actually get on there and walk around, and when they're trying to test stuff to see if things are going to work, they can actually really see if it works, because there's an exact replica of it on the ground. And so she was in that a lot preparing for this, but she said when she got up there, it was totally disorienting and felt very, less familiar, because there are times where she would think she has her feet on the ground, on what is intended to be the floor, or what is the floor on the version that's, in Houston, but she would actually have her feet on the ceiling, and everything is sort of backwards and upside down, and so it took a little while to get used to that. And we talked about her, being able to sleep and all this. It was just incredible. So she's up there, she's doing amazing. I don't know if you guys are following any of this stuff, but she did the first all-female spacewalk with the other female astronaut that's up there. Really cool, sort of historic event. So yeah, that was really cool. So we'll do some more questions, and then after this, I'll put up a bunch of episodes where we're actually really doing stuff. All right, here we go. So I'm picking up where I left off. There was one really quick just saying, I don't have a question, and I just want to say hi. So hi to Rico Link, I guess is what that, there is, hi. So here's the next actual question. I'm producing and mixing since 30 years, working with great artists like Jeff Lorber, Dave Koz, Snoop Dogg, etc. This question might sound a bit odd at first, but I wonder what your thoughts are. Over the years, we've went from various sample rates, various bit depths. These days, I mainly work 24, 44, 1, but for some reason, every time I open up an older 16-bit 44-1 session, I always feel that the stuff sounds a bit more in the face, has a bit more punch. Even the low end is somewhat tighter. I know this is totally against technical facts, but I wonder if there's something to it, or if you experienced anything similar. Man, that's a good question, and I do have a theory about this. I don't, and I've experienced similar things in both the digital domain and the analog domain, and so here's my theory. I think what happens is that both with lower bit rate digital audio and with analog circuitry that is not Class A, what ends up happening is that as you descend lower and lower in the dynamic range, or as things get quieter and quieter, the resolution is not as good, and you get more and more distortion. And so, if you listen to a 16-bit recording, you can really hear the difference. When you get way down into the reverb tails, it sort of trails off into this mess of this bizarre sort of digital distortion that happens. And a similar thing happens with non-Class A analog circuits, where there is this thing called crossover distortion. There's two different active components, whether it's transistors or tubes or whatever, that are trading off. One's handling the positive side of the waveform, one's handling the negative side of the waveform. And what ends up happening is when it switches from one device to the other, there's a little glitch, and they call it crossover distortion. So as things get quieter and quieter, the distortion stays pretty much the same. So the volume of the actual audio relative to the distortion changes. And so essentially, the distortion goes up relative to the volume of the audio. And so a similar thing happens where the audio sort of descends into this little, sea of distortion. It was an interesting thing when I was testing circuitry for the undertone audio stuff, that as you turned the volume down at a certain point, the distortion would go up on Class AB circuits, and that doesn't happen on Class A circuits. And so how I believe it's perceived by listeners is that the preservation of the clarity as things descend into quieter and quieter volumes. So we're talking about like reverb tails that are trailing off, or the relative dynamics between things that are being played really loud, or a lot of times it's the volume difference between things that are close up and things that are far away. I think what happens if that quiet stuff is descending into this distorted mess, that things just become more two-dimensional. It's like just a flat two-dimensional painting, or a photograph, instead of actual 3D binocular vision, because you lose that clarity of the distant stuff. that's how I've always felt about it. And I've experienced that with 16-bit digital audio. And I think there are times where it's kind of cool, where everything just feels like it's right close up, and you don't have as clear of an awareness of the spatial relationship of things in the mix. Sometimes you don't want far away things to actually sound far away. I think there can be a benefit for all of them to actually feel like they're more on the same plane. And I've noticed that with some cheaper Class AV circuits when I'm using like, a really cheap converter recording something, on the fly at a location or something like that, and listen to it back. Sometimes it has a really cool quality where everything is just right in front of you. And so it supposedly, I suppose it really depends on what you're working on. So if you're working on something where you really want that sense of realism, if it's like a super dynamic jazz record or a classical recording, or even in more contemporary music, if you're talking about something where you want to really have that acute awareness of the distance and the space of the room, and really feel like you're in the room, and feel the full dimension of that, Class A circuitry is extraordinary for that. It's one of the things that I think is really amazing about the undertone stuff. When you do recordings like that, it is incredible how well defined the spatial relationships are in the recording, and room mics and stuff like that. But if you want something that's just more like just all up in your face, I think some of that Class AB circuitry and lower resolution digital stuff can actually be beneficial. So there you go. Yeah, I think there's something to it. That's my take on it. All right. So okay, there's multiple questions here. We'll start at the beginning. Okay. I remember reading about you building a Faraday cage to isolate a guitar player to reduce noise. I did do that. I abused guitar players with that. It was kind of insane. That was on the Lost Prophets record. Okay, my main question is, how do you go about getting that incredibly polished vocal sound that is on so many of your pop rock records, and especially the 5 Seconds of Summer albums? Secondary question, how do you end up learning so much about electronics, and are there any resources you would recommend for audio engineers to learn about specifically audio electronics? Okay, cool. The vocal thing, yeah, I don't know that there's really a specific. Well, let's see. I'd say the closest thing that I have to a specific trick for the vocal sound that I get. Usually, I've talked about this before. I have this one really magical 1176 compressor. I got it way back in the 90s. It's just been the most incredible vocal compressor I've ever used. Let's see if I can, here, everything's all backwards in the camera, so I can't see. It's right there. Yeah, so it's, it just stays with me. And so on that 5 Seconds of Summer mix, I don't have the notes in front of me. I guarantee you, for the main lead vocal, it went through that compressor. And it does a thing where it energizes the high end in a really cool way, and it pulls everything right up in your face in a really cool way that actually makes it all feel sort of bigger instead of strangled the way some compressors do, or I find a lot of plug-in compressors will do that. And so if there's any one thing that's really been responsible for that, I would say it's that particular compressor. I definitely try and isolate the vocals to the range that they're singing in. So depending on, if the singer's singing really high or whatever, I just lop off everything below whatever the lowest, the fundamental of the lowest note is that they're singing. Just get rid of all of that. And, let's see. I think another thing that's probably helpful for it, I definitely put a lot of high end in there to just give it a lot of presence, to cut through cymbals and guitars, and especially that 5 Seconds of Summer mix that you're referring to is insanely bright. That one was brighter than I normally do. It was definitely what they were looking for, and so I just tried to figure out a way to make it happen. And so the vocals just need to be super bright on that one. And whenever I do that, you add a lot of high end and a lot of compression, you're gonna need a de-esser. That's been a huge part of being able to get away with have that much presence in a lead vocal for me. And sometimes the de-essers, if I really need to turn something down a lot, if you have the de-esser, working too hard, it'll make the singer sound like they have a lisp. So you got to be really careful of that. So I will go through manually and edit where the sibilance is and just turn down that part. So the de-esser doesn't have to work as hard and it won't sound like they have a lisp. And so, I do all of that stuff just to make it so I can have it be that present, just as far as how it's EQ'd and that far forward in the mix, all that stuff. I also use, dynamic equalizers. Probably back then, Soothe didn't exist, and so I'll use a dynamic equalizer to manage particular overtones that will jump out at you and poke at your ear. If you manage those, that also allows you to have a lot more overall brightness in it without it being as harsh. Hopefully not harsh. And so it's a combination of all of those things that makes it happen. If I'm really struggling with a vocal sound, I'll run it through a tape machine. That just makes it easier to have more brightness in there without it being harsh, because for me, it just rebalances all the harmonic overtones in there. It adds upper harmonics that will make it feel brighter without actually having to turn up a high band on an equalizer. So all of those things combined, I try and blend together to get it so it's just like I can have it as loud as I want without it stabbing me in the ear hole. So and I usually try, like, one of the tests along the way when I'm mixing. If I can have the drums up and the vocal up and it sounds like a record, then I know I'm doing great. All the other stuff, especially on modern pop stuff, if the drums and vocals sound like a record when those are playing, then I'm in great shape. Everything else I can sort of fill in between, and I'll probably succeed. So there you go. There's some of my thoughts on it. So now we got, okay, Andrew Slater. What is your approach to ambience in a rock mix? Do you add reverb and delay to most elements? I'd also be interested in seeing a video about your editing technique. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I forgot. There was another one. There was another question here. I'm blowing it. Okay. How do you learn? Okay. The electronics thing is interesting. My father was an aerospace engineer, hence the, sort of lifelong interest in aerospace. So I was around it a lot growing up. I never went to any school to get an official electrical engineering degree. My knowledge is far, far from that. So there was always an interest there, and I always tinkered with it growing up and knew only very superficial, basic things about it. But it wasn't until I got Larry Jasper. He is the guy that does the actual circuit design for the Undertone audio equipment. When I got him involved, that guy is insanely brilliant at designing audio electronic circuits. And there's certain things that I don't think you can really learn in school. He did go to school for this stuff, but from what I've heard, him just talking about his life, he already knew more about electronics by the time he got to school. I guess his dad got him a soldering iron when he was like 5 years old or something. And so just being around him and asking a lot of questions is really the entirety of what I might know now at this point. And so, I just picked it up from him. And still my knowledge about, actual electronic design is very spotty. I mean, I know stuff that really applies specifically to the Undertone audio stuff, which can apply beyond that. But, it's, it's a long ways away from having an actual electrical engineering degree, which is deep. That's a real serious endeavor to actually really get that knowledge together. So I'm one of those people. I know enough to get myself into trouble, and then Larry gets me out. All right, here we go. Okay, so here we go. Andrew Slater. Approach to ambience in a rock mix. Do you add reverb and delay to most elements? I'd also be interested in seeing a video about your editing techniques. There are so many mixing courses, but I can't really find it. Yeah, I'm definitely going to do the editing thing. I won't talk about it too much here because it's really difficult to explain in a meaningful way without actually being able to see what's happening. So I'm definitely going to do that. It'll probably all come in on an episode where I talk about how I'm recording with tape machines. So just how to capture all that stuff, comp together takes of many tracks and go through the whole thing. So I'll definitely do an episode about that. So ambience and a rock mix. I mean, I typically I still really enjoy getting as much of the ambience from organic sources as possible. I consider organic sources to be the actual room things are recorded in, an actual reverb chamber, basically a room that is designed to be very reverby, where you can put a speaker and a microphone in there, or the sound can just travel directly in there through a door, which is the way it's set up at Barefoot. A plate reverb and spring reverbs. Those are my main ambience sources. I do use digital reverbs and plugins at times. Definitely use lots of delays. But the organic sources, I think there's still something about the complexity of reverb that hasn't totally been recreated digitally. And to my ears, when I turn up real room mics in a session or on my console, it's such a more clear representation of a dimensional space to my brain. Immediately when I hear it, it's like, oh, that's a room, and I hear things getting placed in the room. When I turn up digital reverbs, it's like there's a sound with this thing after it, and it can be a very cool sounding thing. It just doesn't sound that much like a real room to me. So I usually try and do that, and so a lot of times on guitars, I'll set up room mics. I love pre-delaying reverbs because a lot of times you can just expand the perception of, or make it sound like a bigger space than it actually is with pre-delay. So whether it's literally having the sound of the room or the chamber or the plate arrive later, or having that reverb sound have a delay on it, and a lot of times I'll put a timed delay on it, and so it just makes the tail of it sound longer. So you can do a timed delay that's blended in with the actual reverb signal to make it have a longer tail, or you can have the initiation of the reverb start later, and that just tricks your brain into thinking it's a bigger room because it takes longer for that first initiation of the reverb to get back the way it would in a larger room, because it's got to travel a longer distance to bounce back at you. And so, I mean, really the amount or choice to use it or not or whatever is always so dependent on the project. I mean, obviously, like, the Queens of the Stone Age record was intended to be super dry, so we really didn't use much reverbs, but when we did, we made a big deal out of it, so it was really noticeable. And that's probably more how I like to approach it, not just always have this kind of generic blanket like I'm just going to put reverb on things. I like things to be very purposeful, and so if I'm going to put a reverb on something, I really want it to be like, okay, that's cool, that's a cool reverb. There are occasions where it's really subtle, where you're not really aware that there's a reverb. Sometimes I'll do that on vocals where there's an extremely subtle ambience on the vocals there that you probably wouldn't even be aware of unless you're really trying to listen for it. Very short, and so it just connects the vocal with the other things that are going on, so they don't feel too separate from it. But I'm not trying to actually have you be aware of a reverb. But if I introduce a reverb somewhere, I want it to be very, very intentional, very meaningful. I very often I don't put any digital reverb on distorted guitars. I feel like it just sort of muddies things up. And so typically, I'll use delays, like a very subtle delays, just so there's like, you know, a lingering after effect of the guitars floating around. So when they stop playing at times, it's not just, you know, too stark. So sometimes I'll use delays. In general, particularly on guitars, distorted guitars, I prefer reverbs that are not as diffused. So it's closer to like a more complex tap delay. There's a patch that I created a long time ago on the Eventide H3000 that I call Bigness, which is just a tap delay. It's a 6 tap delay that as it trails longer and longer, it sounds more like reverb, but initially it's more like a slapback. And when reverbs get too dense, particularly or too diffused, particularly digital reverbs, you can start to hear the ringy sort of metallic overtones in them. And I like the reverbs to be a little more open and airy sounding. And so a great way to do that, you know, turn the diffusion down on the reverb and you'll hear it just kind of open up and get more airy. And I like to do reverb delay combos a lot on vocals. So there'll be a reverb there. But to make the tail longer, instead of increasing the reverb time, I'll put a delay on it because it's a way to have the reverb be less diffused if you're using an actual delay instead of more of the reverb tail trying, you know, the reverb itself trying to replicate itself to extend out. Because at the end of the day, that's what reverbs are, is just a bunch of delays coming back at you at all these different times, and at a point where you cannot hear the discrete reflections of the delays, but it is a collection of an enormous number of delays that are being filtered as it trails off. And so yeah, I mean, I lean more on the tap delay side of things instead of the super diffused reverby side of things. And so, you know, it's really up to the content to determine how wet it's going to be. But there's some general thoughts about it on guitars and rock music and whatnot. General approach. All right, let's see what we got. Okay, yeah. Okay, so here we go. Joe Scaletta. Some of your videos, you'll do an extreme EQ move on a kick inside mic. Then you'll delay it to get back in phase. What do you check that extreme EQ mic against? The same direct mic, overheads? Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so initially, I check it against the mic that it was duplicated from. So it's got to work there first, and then I'll check it with the rest of the drum kit if there is more of drum kit. I've done this at times with just a single microphone. But yeah, I've been really loving that trick. I'm doing it, you know, all over the place right now. Even when there's a bunch of microphones, I'll still do that trick. Or I'll take, if there's multiple mics on the kick drum, I'll find a mic that filters down really cool and then delay that, or, you know, just play with the timing of it until it really feels satisfying with the close mic. And that's really what I'm looking for, is that combination of, like, I can leave the original mic unfiltered in the low end and see if I can find a place where I can delay that subby thing and it all adds up and gives me that sort of like boo kind of effect that I really love. Sometimes I have to high pass the mic that has the rest of the upper frequencies, and so there's like a crossover point there where the higher frequency stuff just hands off to the sub frequency stuff, and it does that sort of dive down and, you know, across the frequencies. And so I just kind of play with you know, the low pass that's on the subby part, the high pass that's on the high frequency part. You know, I usually high pass it maybe somewhere around 90 or 100 hertz, so it's still punchy, but it doesn't have the subby stuff on there. And just play with where they cross over, or have the top one not cross over, and the timing, and just fuss with it until it does that thing that just feels really punchy and satisfying. I can have it, you know, loud in the mix without it eating up too much headroom. because that impact is being spread across over time a little bit and not all hitting you at once and eating up too much headroom. So that's really sort of the motivation for it. And I initially reference it to the close mic, that it was duplicated from. But yeah, good question there. Okay. Eric, what is your approach to Eric, what is your approach to the master bus? When do you start putting processing on the master in the process of a mix? Would love to hear your thoughts on this place of sacred ground. Well, I'm sure, as you've noticed, nothing is sacred on this YouTube channel. Giving it all away here. So, I usually try to start out with nothing on there. I never start with like a mountain of EQ and compression or processing on the mix bus. I still, start with the intention of like, I'm going to treat the individual things, turn them up, it's going to sound perfect, and I'll be done, and not have to do that on the mix bus. I feel like the mix ultimately will be better if you can pull that off. And so I'm usually starting with that mindset. I always end up putting something on the mix bus, and so I'll start off with nothing and go through and do all of my individual treatments of everything in the mix. So I'll EQ and process the close mics on the drums and overheads and get the room mics and drum sound happening, then do the bass and then get into the guitars and then add what other additional stuff, obviously it depends on what's in the song. And then usually at that point, once I get all the instruments done, I'll experiment a little bit with overall compression on all of the music before I get into the vocals, and try and finish the music picture a little bit. And then I'll do vocal stuff so I can start seeing how it's going to sit in the mix and stuff like that. And then pretty quick after that, these days, because of all of the crazy, mastering limiting issues that we have, that there's inevitably going to be a lot of limiting on this when it's mastered. Once I get everything up, I may have some compression going on the overall mix that I like. I'll start listening to my mastering chain, and then usually I have to make some adjustments in the drums, turn up the close mics a little bit because the transients of those start getting shaved off by the mastering limiter, so I have to sort of compensate for that. And so it's really like, after I've got everything going, then I'll start hearing the limiting and stuff. Sometimes I'll do it a little earlier, maybe. No, usually not before. Not before I start trying an overall compressor on the whole mix. So usually after that is when I'll start doing the mastering stuff, and then just start, making the small adjustments that I need to in order to accommodate that loss of dynamics that happens there. I have to say that I feel like that is changing. There's been some interesting questions and points being raised about HDCD releases and stuff, which I had on this recent Grace record, and the mixes were designed to accommodate the limiting, and when I take the limiting entirely off, then the mixes sound too dynamic, if you can imagine that. But I think there is a point where it's like, things are kind of jumping out at you, and I want things to be contained in a certain way so they're not distracting from the vocal or whatever. And so I didn't used to do that before all the level madness happened. I would just mix it so it sounded right and then let the mastering engineer figure it out from there. There was a certain point where that just fell apart, where the stuff would come back. It's like, this doesn't sound like my mix anymore at all. And so I'm sort of stuck having to accommodate that. But that it presents a problem now when there are formats now streaming. Obviously, I did a whole episode about that, where they're level matching things, and so it's not as essential to deliver to them a super loud thing. There's varying opinions about that, but It's sort of a new frontier. I'm still sort of figuring it out myself, but I would say, it's accurate to say that there's less, at least less of an incentive to blast your mix with limiting, the way the streaming services are handling it. So it's not as essential as it would be on a CD now, or as it had been on CDs. And now with the HD releases, I would really love to be able to do that without the limiting, but it's a different mix. And I didn't have time to do that on Grace's record, to just totally redo my mix just for the HD releases. You know, I would have liked to, but I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. I'm not sure what the solution is there, but hopefully this will all kind of mellow out, and I'll be able to go back to the way I used to do it when I was mixing first Third Eye Blind record and the Smash Mouth records and all of that stuff. Man, I think the first time I really ran into a problem with this was, maybe the first Taking Back Sunday record, or somewhere around there, where I got it back and I was like, no way, I can't use this. It came back from the mastering just unusable. And so yeah, it's tricky. It's constantly changing, and I'm still figuring it out. But that at least is my mix approach. When I apply that stuff in mixing now. Okay. Okay, so here, this is about de-essing. I just talked about this. I'll talk specifically about that right now. Hey, Eric, would love to know about your experience with S syllables and recording good lead vocals. Okay, cool. There's a bunch of wonderful ways to capture lead vocals. I've done a bunch of different approaches for that. There's, on Grace's record, I used a Tele 251. Those are lovely if you have one around. I love SM7s. I've used SM7s on so many singers. That was definitely Steve Harwell from Smash Mouth. That was his mic for sure. Sounded amazing for him. I've used the SM7 for, let's see, probably Miles Kennedy with Slash. I used it on a bunch of the singers for the first Slash record. Trying to think else. Who else was a really good SM7 singer? Yeah, I can't think of it right now. But probably Taking Back Sunday. That I'm pretty sure that was all SM7 stuff. And so yeah, that thing's all over the place. Occasionally I'll do something tweakier, use like an old ribbon mic if I'm trying to get something that's more vintage sounding. I have a 44 RCA 44 that sounds great. The one that I was going for a very vintage sound on the song Walking on the Sun. So that was the only song on that first Smash Mouth record where I used a Coles 4038 for the lead vocals. I pretty much always use an Undertone Audio mic preamp unless I'm doing something that's going to be specifically nostalgic and sort of fuzzy sounding. Then I'll use an Altec 1567 mic mixer thing. Just a beautiful old tube preamp that's got a bunch of wonderful coloration to it. And then when I'm recording, I will typically use either the 1176 I just mentioned. That thing is always amazing. Or I will use an Unfair Child. The Unfair Child has been more common lately. Or a combination of the two of them. Recently, Grace's voice, I've talked about this a bit. It's wildly dynamic. She sings super soft and insanely loud. And so I use 2 compressors in series on her voice. And so that was this old Decca custom compressor, which is essentially kind of like an 1176. It's just a little cleaner. It's a FET style compressor. I do that first and then the Unfair Child on her voice. And there was a lot of times where I essentially would do the same thing by using a compressor when something was tracked in order to get things the dynamics close enough so I can capture the vocal in a way that's not totally out of control. And then in the mix, add more compression. And so at the end of the day, it is 2 compressors in series on most of the stuff that you've heard me do, because I'll add more compression. I do like to add a distortion to vocals. And so on the consoles, when I'm mixing on a console, what I'll do is mult the lead vocal track to another channel on the console and put it to the mic preamp input with a line level signal, so it's just completely blown out, and then just blend a tiny bit of that in. Boop. And it just adds this super constant, edgy, energized, sort of fuzzy sound. It's very subliminal in there, but it makes it just stay right in your face. So all of those things affect the sibilance. All of those things make the sibilance louder, because the sibilance is inherently vastly quieter than the actual tones, the notes that are being sung. And as the dynamics get diminished by making all of the quiet stuff louder with compression, or I guess at the end of the day, you're making the louder stuff quieter, it gets closer and closer to the volume of the sibilance, and then the whole thing gets turned up with gain makeup on a compressor. Then all the sibilance inescapably is going to get a lot louder. I used to track vocals with a DBX de-esser, the S902, I think was the model, 901, 90 something. And I would set it kind of subtle to make sure that I never did too much, because you cannot undo it. Like, once you de-ess too aggressively, it has destroyed the sound of that particular sibilant moment. And so I do it kind of safe when it was going in, but try and have it a little bit under control, and then do more if I needed to in the mix. I stopped doing that because the plug-in de-essers are automatable. They basically do the exact same thing as the DBX one, and so I have way more control. And there's some times where the sibilance is so loud that it's too much, like I just mentioned, for the de-esser to handle, and so I will manually turn it down. I just put an edit on each side of that sibilant sound and use the region gain adjust in Pro Tools to just turn it down. So I'll turn it down maybe 10 dB, so the de-esser doesn't have to work anywhere near as hard, and it'll sound a lot more natural. And so it's really important for me. I work a lot on the sibilance on lead vocals. It's a big part of being able to have them loud without being, harsh, because the sibilance just gets really overwhelming, when you're adding that much, compression and brightness and distortion and stuff to a vocal. It just gets really, really intense. And so I work a lot on that. I mostly just use Wave's Renaissance de-esser, because that was, from what I can tell, was basically a copy of the DBX de-esser that I used to use. So it responds similar to that. The controls are similar. I really like the FabFilter de-esser as well. Sometimes that one will sound a little more natural to me. It's a little safer to use if I just need a little bit of de-essing and it doesn't, not going too aggressive. And sometimes on the Renaissance one, I usually don't use the shelf version of it. That's the version that will make it sound like the singer has a lisp. You got to be careful with that version of it. I'll do the full wide band version of it, so it's just turning down the full spectrum whenever there's an S sound. And then sometimes I'll do the narrow band one right around 5K, because the singer, depending on the character of their sibilance, sometimes there's just a whistle in there, and the 5K will actually make it, just dipping the 5K will make it sound a little more natural. So I'll use a combination of a full bandwidth one and one that's notching out sort of a whistly overtone in there. But I put a lot of effort into the sibilance. There was a certain point where I think it was Matt Rad was working on stuff at Barefoot. He was camped out in Studio B for a couple of years there, and we were both sort of talking about it, and he was working on sibilance, and he had the realization and pointed out that this really seems like the difference between a really incredible, like amazing, you know, sort of like top-notch production and a mediocre one is the sibilance in the vocal. Like whenever you listen to a really, really incredible, like super duper pop record, the sibilance is just perfect. And so I think it's a really important thing to pay attention to. So that's an overview of my approach on it there. Okay, here we go. Bob Kowalski. Has becoming a dad changed you musically at all? Does your family have any pets? Who do you admire as an engineer and producer? And finally, who do you admire most as a person other than your immediate family? Wow, interesting questions here. So, has being a dad changed me musically? I don't know. I, I, I don't think so. Oddly enough, I mean, maybe uh, it's definitely affected me emotionally, and I think ultimately that will affect me musically. Um, but you know, I mean, I'm an emotional person. I cry at the end of Finding Nemo, and I watch it all the time with my son. It's his favorite movie right now. Um, uh, and so it definitely, I've become more sentimental. I think it's impossible not to. Just every day, there's just another moment where it's like, oh my God, he did this thing that was so adorable and cute and wonderful. Or now he's like, he he says hug and grabs onto you. It's just it makes your heart explode every time. It's so incredible. I love being a dad so much. I'm the luckiest dad ever because Sagan is incredible. Um, let me see. I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting this. We don't have any pets right now. Not that I wouldn't want one. I had a dog for a long time, 14 years. I had a wonderful little dog named Elsie that came to the studio with me every day. She passed away in 2014 on Thanksgiving Day, and that was for any of you that are dog lovers, it's rough, man. That was a mess. But it's because we travel so much. We were feeling like it wouldn't make sense to have a pet. Sadly, I'm allergic to cats, so cat is not an option for us. But at some point, we'd love to have a little dog or a big dog or whatever. I love dogs. Let's see. And let's see, who are my engineers, producers? I'd mentioned Sean Everett recently. I just think he's doing incredible work. He's one engineer that I think is just amazing. And I think a lot of my engineering reference points are more nostalgic. The Johns brothers, just incredible. So Glenn and Andy Johns, they just recorded all of the rock music. That's incredible. From the Beatles to the Who to Led Zeppelin to on and on and on and on and on. That was a lot of the Johns brothers, and so yeah, there's something that's happening there that is just so magical. I still haven't quite unraveled how it happens. How they get some of those sounds. Some of the sounds on Zeppelin 4, I mean, obviously When the Levee Breaks, Misty Mountain Hop, those I don't know. It's that's that music made an indelible mark on me, and the sound of it made an indelible mark on me. And so I have a particular reverence for that stuff for sure. I just love the sort of gritty crunchiness in the mid-range, that there is so much mid-range aggression in that music without it being harsh. So there's a modern example and sort of a more nostalgic example. I just want to make sure I'm remembering all these. Admire most as a person other than your immediate family. There's a lot of people out there that I think are doing really extraordinary things. Obviously, I've always been a huge admirer of Carl Sagan. He's our son's namesake. He was the person that really brought more academic, theoretical astronomy and astrophysics into people's living rooms with this incredible series in the 70s called The Cosmos, which was, remade with Neil deGrasse Tyson. And so he was the guy that really sort of like brought all of that into everybody's lives, just sort of your everyday folks that wouldn't normally be into that, in such an incredibly entertaining and meaningful way, that I think changed, a whole generation of people's perspective on our position in the universe, and what's really important, what's not. If you've never heard it or read it, he wrote a poem called the Pale Blue Dot. I think I'm remembering the title right. I think that's it, Pale Blue Dot, about our planet, and it's so incredible. He just has this amazing, unifying message to how he sees things, that we're really all in this together, and we have this extraordinary opportunity, to do, extraordinary things, and to take extraordinary care of each other on this planet, in a way that, I just thought was really beautiful. I think he was just a person that was way ahead of his time, and was very inspiring in every way. There's a lot of people like that, for me. I'm trying to remember the name of this gentleman that I saw interviews and documentary with, TED Talk. Okay, let me see. I'm gonna look it up because this is good. I'll edit this out and then make it sound like I'm super smart. Okay, yeah. There's this lawyer that I stumbled across recently. Actually, I think it was my mom that turned me on to this guy. This guy named Brian Stevenson that totally blew me away. He's a lawyer, and he's an advocate for the rights of, particularly young folks that find themselves in prison. And it's what he does is so amazing to me, because it's a group of people that do not garner a lot of sympathy. They've done, potentially with some of these folks, really horrible things. But still, his take on it was so beautiful. It's that, and is beautiful, that people should not be defined by the worst thing that they've done in their life. That even somebody that may have committed a murder, or done some sort of horrible robbery or whatever, they are still somebody's daughter, or somebody's father, or whatever. They have other aspects of their life where they're probably a combination of doing some wonderful things and being very meaningful to other people, but they've done one thing that was really horrible, that put them in prison. And they're not just a murderer; they are these other things as well. And that that one thing may have been a mistake, and they may be able to recognize that and be able to move forward with the aspects of them that are wonderful and beautiful and meaningful to other people that they share their life with. And so he's an advocate for these people that a lot of times just get totally just disposed of in the correctional system, just get lost in there. And it's one of the most incredibly empathetic and positive takes on humanity I've ever seen. He's an amazing person doing extraordinary work, that I think needs to be done. So there you go. There's a couple examples there. I think there's one more in there. Okay. Oh yeah, that was it. Okay, moving on. Bedroom Rockstar. Okay, you get the award for the best YouTube username. Also, okay. Is this okay? There's two things here. I'm sorry, I have to go backwards so I can go from the earliest question to the most recent lesson. Okay, do you have any bucket list artists that you've always wanted to work with but haven't yet had the chance? Also, who inspires you today in terms of artists and producers and engineers? I've talked about the producer engineer part of it. I love super creative bands. Let's see. I loved Chris Cornell. Sadly, we lost him not too long ago. So that whole um, Soundgarden record. Super Unknown was amazing. I would have loved to work with Soundgarden or Chris Cornell. Um, and let's see, I'm trying to think if there's other stuff. That Audio Slave record that he made was amazing. Just super simple, heavy, just great riffs, with a powerful voice. That's usually the thing that really gets me excited about setting up microphones and recording. And so yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else like right this second that I've heard. There's one that would be really, really fun to do. This band called Red Fang. They just, it's just amazing, like classic Sabbathy rock. They don't overthink anything. They seem super fun. They've made some of the best music videos I've ever seen in my life. They're super funny and awesome. They just understand like how dudes process rock music. And I'm a dude and I love rock music, so they would be really fun. So there's some examples there. Okay. Also, I'm curious as to how loud your monitors are when you mix. Anything approaching 80 dB sounds way too loud for me. Well, that's good because 80 dB is not that loud. I typically don't have the monitors very loud when I'm mixing for the majority of the time. There's only a brief period while I'll turn them up. Oh, I should put my face back up here. There we go. A brief time while I'll turn them up when I'm sort of finalizing, shaping the low end of the drums and the bass. I like to just be able to feel it in the room a little more, to just have that energy sort of hit my body. There's something about that's informative for me. But the rest of the time, I keep the volume down more. And probably the only exception is if basically at the end of the day, if I want the mix to be brighter, I keep the volume lower. If I want the mix to be warmer, I'll have the monitors louder. It's kind of that simple, and I have some sort of like some marks on my monitor level control where I know it's like if I want this to be brighter, I just can't go above this, or I'll just start taking out all the high end. And so, a good example of the other way is the Death from Above record. I knew I wanted that record to be really satisfying to listen to loud, and so I mixed with it louder than I normally would, and so that record is just darker than other stuff that I do, and so it's really designed to be listened to loud. That music, I think, should be listened to loud. So, but yeah, I'm probably in the same range most of the time as you. It's probably in that sort of 80 dB range most of the time. I just keep it real quiet, most of the time. Okay. Okay, here we go. So, make sure this is the totality. Okay. Mr. Vin, well, hello, good sir. Okay, let's see. What would you recommend to do if a guy like me is rather socially awkward with a bit of anxiety going on and still wants to work in this industry? It's really holding me back quite a lot, frowny face. Anyway, I'm thankful for guys like you who spend the free time to make content that I can learn from. I think there's probably a really great path to go down. I think the place where you could really, really succeed wonderfully is mixing, because so much mixing now is done where people can just send you files. You can be in your own environment. The interactions can be entirely email or very brief conversations or whatever. And so you can, you have the luxury of, if that's part of it is really uncomfortable for you, there's no reason. I don't feel like anybody has to do anything that they're not comfortable doing, and there's nothing wrong with being a more private person and being more comfortable with your own company. I don't, that's if that's what works for you, then that's great. And mixing would be an amazing way to do that, man. If you just immerse yourself in becoming the most amazing mixer on the planet, nobody will care if you're in the room or not, because if you're in the room together or not, because it wouldn't matter. You can just get it and send it off. And so I think on the other side of things, if you're trying to be a record producer, or if you're trying to write songs with people, or even if you're engineering in the room with people, that social awkwardness could be very, very challenging for you and other people. I've noticed that for myself. A lot of times, and there's other engineers that have written books, about their experiences engineering. They've said that like you succeed or fail by your ability to make a personal connection with the people that you're working with. If you are fun and funny and personable and light up the room with, witty retorts and can have banter with the band and all of that stuff. So they're having a fun time making a record with you. You're the person that's going to get hired again, probably over the actual work that's being done. The comfort of the experience of them in the room, which is so much based on how you relate, to people, is so much of what people take away from the experience, more so than the sound of it. Some people that are extraordinarily exceptional at what they do can get away with being monumental jerks, just because the work they do is so good. There are some examples out there. I'm not going to name them. But I think mixing would be an amazing direction to go in, where you can have as much or as little contact with people that as you're comfortable with, and do amazing work. There's I heard a really incredible account recently from a person that is a research scientist working in the Galapagos Islands. I was lucky enough to go there last year. I think it was last year. Or no, was it this year? It was this year. Yeah. Wow, it seems so long ago. And it was really interesting talking to her. So she's actively, involved in scientific research in the Galapagos archipelago, and she was talking about, that whole experience. And she was talking about like getting grants and all the politics involved of being a research scientist. I mean, everything that you do, anything that can be done as a person is going to have some sort of issues, if political type issues, where you're having to collaborate and interact and negotiate with other people if you're trying to do it and get paid and all of that stuff. And so she was talking about this whole new thing of how people are seeing the work environment, that they're recognizing the difference between what they call hard skills and soft skills. And the hard skills is your actual technical ability in whatever you're doing. So it's going to be your academic training if you went to college, or how much experience you have. In my case, I've just done it a long time. Whatever you sort of bring to the table with your experience and knowledge with the task that's being done. The soft skills, the other side of it, is all of the interrelationship type stuff. How you get along with other people. Are you likable? Are you good at conflict resolution? Those are what they call soft skills. And what people are realizing is that people will succeed or fail within a collaborative endeavor, some sort of work endeavor, way more by their soft skills than by their hard skills. And so, quite often there'll be, multiple people that may have the hard skills, the training and experience for a particular thing. The person that succeeds is the person that has the soft skills. They're likable, they're friendly, they're fun, they're good communicators, they're good at resolving conflicts. That's becoming way, way more important. It's much more difficult to teach and train for people. So that it was a hugely illuminating for me, that like the whole sort of management and HR sort of world of things has shifted their focus on soft skills. Like, this is how we're going to get a large group of people to be able to continue to work together and succeed, is by focusing on soft skills. Let's not worry as much about the hard skills. People can be trained and they can learn and they'll get the experience quickly. But if they're likable and they can get along with other people, then we can actually have these people work together for an extended period of time and really do something extraordinary. So, it's important, man. That it's super important. Okay, moving on. Okay, we got a bunch of stuff here. So, not really sure how to pronounce this. This is Imslick something. Okay. Why did you start a YouTube channel? Um, I've answered that one before, so I'll skip that one in the interest of saving time here. Do you experience a downgrading of the sound when you process it through plugins? Would you rather get the sound in the analog world? Okay. So I'll do that one. Then we'll come back and read the rest of them. It's a little both. In the past, I definitely struggled with plug-in equalizers. Those have gotten much, much better. I'm definitely using equalizers now that I really enjoy the sound of. There are still hardware equalizers like the Undertone one and like maybe a real old Pultec and stuff that have sort of a size and energy to them that I haven't fully been able to recreate in the box. And recently, I have these whatchamajigger, these old Siemens EQs that I'm enjoying at the moment. And so, um, and so, but the plug-in EQs have gotten way better, and the power and flexibility of like the FabFilter Q3, there's nothing out of the box, I guess, barring the Undertone EQ. That's the only thing that can come close to it. But it only has 4 bands, and you have unlimited bands in the Q3, and so it does things that are very, very difficult to replicate outside of the box, and so those things I'm super, super into, and I'm not finding as much of this issue of the sound getting smaller. And I know what you're talking about. Very early versions of Pro Tools with the sort of built-in EQ that they had and stuff. Everything just sounded small, dull, and harsh all at the same time. It was just kind of excruciating. But it's gotten so much better. Similar with the compressor plugins. Those still have a ways to go for me. I find things just get kind of harsh and hardened, with plug-in compressors. They do work, and I use them at times. Right now, I'm enjoying like the TGI EMI emulation that Waves does. I've been using that in some stuff. I like some of the 1176 ones. The crystalloid algae ones are pretty good. The UAD ones are good. And so, yeah, there are some compressor plugins in there that I am using and getting results from that are good and totally working fine. I'm going to do a mix demonstration, a mix thing coming up, deconstruction or whatever, soon. That's entirely in the box mix, and it's a massive mix. There's like almost 200 tracks in there. And so it's a ton of plugins going on in there. So you'll see some of it in that. So yeah, I would say I did feel that earlier on. It's definitely getting better. It has gotten a lot better. I'm using more plugins now, and I think there are times where the plugins do sort of expand the sound. The harmonic coloration plugins have, those didn't exist early in Pro Tools. Everybody was like, why would you want to distort things, and so those have gotten way better and make a huge difference. FabFilter, Saturn, I love, the tape machine emulations, all that stuff makes a huge difference for in the box. Okay. Okay. Your opinion. What are the causes that make a band successful or their music liked by many people? Man, that's interesting. That's a broad question. The experiences that I've had, I've made that transition with bands early on. It was Third Eye Blind and Smash Mouth. I helped them record their demos that ultimately got them a record deal, and then worked with them after they'd gotten signed and made records and stuff. And I think it's sort of a given that the band has to be, let's say, basically good. This gets tricky because music is so subjective. I love the Shags, but nobody taught them how to play their instruments at all. I think My Pal Foot Foot is incredible, but by most standards, that's not even music, but I love it anyways. So this is very subjective, but we're going to generalize here. If a band, let's say that they're in some, sort of generalized objective way, they're a good band. So they can all play their instruments well and sing generally in tune, and there's something sort of generally compelling about what they're doing. I personally feel like it's mostly going to be being in the right place at the right time. That I really believe that there's probably lots of really incredible bands that never get recognized, or never get their break because they're not in Nashville or LA or New York, or near San Francisco when I connected with Smash Mouth and Third Eye Blind. And so they're just not in proximity of people or ears or a way to really connect their music with people. In theory, there's the internet now, but it's so vast. I mean, like, there's just so much stuff on the internet. Like, it would be very difficult to get noticed at all on there. So, so then, and then I think it's timing. It's like doing the right kind of music at the right time. Music is popular music is an ever-changing and evolving thing. And I really tuned into music when I was young and fell in love with rock music. That's the music that speaks to me emotionally. That is not at the center of popular music right now. It's its own genre, and it does its thing and stuff, but it's not going to be the thing that gets a billion plays on YouTube now. So if there's a new rock band that comes out now, it's not going to do that, because it's not where the center of popular music is now. That's moved, it's just sort of blended together the worlds of hip hop and urban music and electronic music, and all those things have kind of blended together into this sort of amalgam that makes pop music now. And it's its own version of being creative and doing its thing. And there's a lot of really amazing creative stuff that's going on in that world. It's not my world, so it doesn't speak to me. But like, if you want to be wildly successful making music, you can't right now. You have to do something that is within that universe, but is a little bit in the next step in the evolution. I think you can be flavor of the moment, and if you're quick enough and sneak something in there that's real popular, you hear people do it all the time. Something will come out that is really, really successful. I guess. Oh boy, I'm so ignorant to modern popular music. Trying to remember the names of these artists. I'm just so bad at this. I'm not even going to embarrass myself trying to remember the names of these people. But yeah, there's a popular thing that comes out and everybody copies it, and you can do that. And I think in some ways it's a safe way to go. If you're real quick about it, you can get some quick success. That's a good bet, a good gamble. But I think a better, well, it's not necessarily better, but the way to make more of an impact is to to anticipate whatever that next thing is, and try and be that next step in the evolution of what the center of popular music is. For me, my sort of breakout stuff was Third Eye Blind and Smash Mouth. They happened right at the same time. And for Smash Mouth, it was me tapping into this sort of the nostalgia of this kind of like psychedelic surf garagey sounds of the 60s, and bringing that into a modern context. Nobody was doing or heard anything like that on radio at that time. And so it really made an impact because it was different. At that time, there was like, ska and punk, No Doubt was really big doing ska stuff, and Green Day was really big. There's a lot of like punk pop stuff going on, and some of the more sort of like Nirvana. There's a big wave of, we were still riding the sort of grunge wave, maybe at the tail end of that, and so I was specifically doing things that were contrary to that, to do something that really stood out. I sort of did that again with Grace's current record. everybody's obsessed with reverb right now. So I made like the driest, most intimate record I could with Grace, just because I don't want it to sound like everything else. I would rather take that gamble and just bank more on my ability to do something that's going to be compelling and interesting and musical, that is its own thing, and make its own mark, and not try and just do something that's more like everything else than anybody else. That's one of my descriptions of popular music. So I don't know, there's some thoughts about it, different ways that you can approach it. But you know, if you're really, really good, you got to connect with somebody to get it out there. You can't just do it in your bedroom. And so being in the right place, right time is important. Doing the right kind of music at the right time is really important. So it makes an impact, or is right in the center of what's going on. That's really, really popular in the moment, and then you can sneak in there and do something. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on it. What did people do in the days where there was no Soothe or FabFilter plugins? How did they fix the sound? I'm interested in your perspective. I've talked about it a little bit. Man, those tools just make it so much easier. But you know, I would spend hours and hours chasing around trying to tweeze out these tiny little frequencies, either with my old Orband Paracrossalizer EQ as a 10-band parametric EQ, where you could do very narrow bands. And so I just go in there and try and find those things and do the best I can to tweeze everything out. And so there's that. There was a dynamic equalizer made by this company called BSS, where you could get a pretty narrow Q, and it would essentially do what Soothe does, but you would have to select the frequency yourself. And so I do it that way. And so there were ways to do it, but nothing that was anywhere near as powerful as effective. And so, you know, you sort of you live and die by the circumstances that you're in. And so back then, you know, people really approach things with the reality that it's like, I can't fix this. Like, it needs to sound right now going on to this tape machine, because I can't edit it, I can't tune it, and I don't have a thing that's going to automatically find all of the frequencies that are poking out and turn them down for me. So I need to find the right mic and put it in the right place on a great sounding guitar amp with a great guitar player, so it just sounds great. And that's really what people used to do, because they had no other option. If it doesn't sound great going in, then they changed things in how they were approaching capturing it, so it did. And you lived and died by that principle. And if you weren't able to do that, then you just didn't get hired. So it was just a different way to approach it. And I don't think it was, there's anything that's right or wrong. I'm not trying to say that people are cheating now. We use the tools that we have now in the way that makes the most sense and is the most effective. Some of these tools allow us to move more quickly while we're recording and not abuse people by having to try every single microphone in every position to really get it right. Sometimes it was kind of exhaustive and kind of a pain in the ass, and sometimes you didn't get it right and it sucked and it was a big bummer because you didn't have the tools to fix it. And so now we have the luxury of being able to go like, okay, this is super close. I know I can get this to work later. Let's just get the performance and move, which is kind of great. So I'm not saying it's better to just get it right going in. They had no choice back then. And now, it's like, I love being able to fix stuff. I'm pulling up an old T-Ride Master right now. It's going to be one of the things that happens coming up soon, and, doing a little reference mix of it now. And man, I wish I had these tools back then. The reference mix that I'm pulling up now, I think is going to be about 100 million times better than the original mix of the T-Ride stuff. And it's just so interesting applying these tools now to stuff that I captured back then. Even though I was really trying to I'm going to get this perfect going in now, it could still definitely be better. There you go. People had solutions for it. The main solution was getting it right. Okay. Did Josh Homme blow up any speakers during the recordings? I managed destroying a couple of bass amps with my baritone guitar over the years. I'm trying to think. I don't remember any speakers actually getting blown while we were tracking um, on that record. We did the thing where there were two of these 215 bass cabinets facing each other for the bass guitar with an SVT amp turned all the way up. It was just one of the loudest things I've ever heard in my life. But the speakers survived. So I don't think, I don't remember any speakers getting blown up in the course of making that record. It may have happened. I'm guessing maybe live they might blow stuff up, but not in that particular round. All right, cool questions in there. Okay, Wada is asking, I'd love to hear your take on drum tuning. Okay, this has been asked before. Yeah, I'm definitely going to do a video on that. Yes, also, I would love to know your favorite cymbals for recording. I just did a thing about that recently. Big beats. Man, I wonder maybe you're asking about giant beats, which I do use, and I love those cymbals. So yeah, I've been using giant beats, Peisty Signature Series Full Crash. I love that thing. Yeah, so there you go. Do you have any unique vocal sounds that you discovered from making records that you enjoy more than the vanilla go-to vocal sound of a quality mic up close? What mic setup configuration and gear did you end up using that made it gel with the sound of the band? So I just talked about this a little bit. I love the SM7. That's just a great mic. It's very malleable. You can sort of push it to be more hi-fi or lo-fi or whatever. It just takes a lot of treatment very well. You can push it in a lot of different directions. So SM7's great. I've used tweaking microphones for certain things. I have this an RCA 77 that was kind of broken and had this really kind of mid-rangey thin sound. I'd use that for some stuff. For telephony sounds, I actually have the mouthpiece of a telephone that I wired up to be a microphone, so I'd have people sing into that instead of using plugins and filters and stuff. Sometimes it just has more personality if you actually do it with the mic that you're using, so I'll do that. I have a collection of what I call Bobo mics. They're just these cheap, crappy old microphones. A lot of them are crystal mics. That is actually a microphone technology. Somehow they use a crystal to capture the sound. And they're extremely lo-fi. I mean, just the narrow band that is sort of like the talking frequency range for human beings. So those can be really cool sounding. I have a bunch of those. There's one called the Monarch that I really like. And I've used like old AKG D15. Was it a D15? Oh, D19. The D19 is a great old dynamic mic that's cool for vocals sometimes. There's a thing called the D20. No, it's weird. It looks like a little spaceship. I forget the number on it now. D24. Oh man, this is a disaster. I can't remember the name of it. I'll figure it out. Maybe I'll post a picture up of it. But that's really cool too for vocals. Tweaky little drum mic. Sometimes cool for that. And for a long time, I was definitely doing a thing like all over the Third Eye Blind record. I was running vocals through guitar amps a lot and just blending a little bit of that in for the spring reverb and sometimes for the tremolo and blending that in. I love that trick. Really amazing classic example of that was that song Crimson and Clover. They do a very aggressive amplifying of a vocal, through an old amp with a lot of trem on it. It's a cool effect. So that's really cool. So yeah, I mean, I like to do treatments to things to make them a vocal sound more watery, or put it through a Leslie speaker with reverb. Let's see, I'm trying to think. So yeah, amps is really cool. For vintage sounds, I definitely use ribbon mics. I just mentioned the Smash Mouth song "Walking on the Sun." That was definitely a Coles 4038. Lately, I've been using an RCA 77 and an RCA 44. Those are amazing vocal mics. If you want to sound nostalgic, you can put high end in there, add high end, but what the high end that you get when you add it is so good. So I love those. There's a peculiar record, this album by a band called Persephone's Bees. That was a real labor of love for me. The band, I discovered them in San Francisco, made a record, helped them get signed to Columbia. They put out a record. It didn't really do much, but man, it's such a cool album. We did a bunch of really cool creative stuff on that. And most all the vocals on that were recorded with a D19. I was trying to get a kind of a tweakier vocal sound on that. I have one that has this like weird sort of almost like gold chrome finish on it. We called it Goldie. So we used the Goldie on a lot of that. So yeah, there's some thoughts about it. I just mentioned the thing of like taking the vocal and putting it through another channel on your mixer through the mic input. So you have a line level going into the mic input on a console. It's just completely obliterated with distortion, and you blend that in a little bit, adds this really cool edge to the vocal. So those are things that can just take it away from just being a simple, basic, like clean, this is a person singing into a high quality microphone, you're welcome, kind of thing. So there's some cool tricks for that. Okay. About the kick and snare sound of 5 Seconds of Summer album and / Anastasia song and album. I love that same process and technique that you show in your videos. I mean, using gate, EQ, NS10, UA7, kick / snare. What do you think that is crucial to this spatiality? I love that, man. Thanks for the channel. Okay. Well, I know on 5 Seconds of Summer, I'm definitely using samples on that for sure to get that kick drum sound. I didn't record the main drums on that. I overdubbed some stuff to help the sort of roominess of the floor tom when it's sort of playing this tom pattern. But there's definitely samples on there, so I think the room that you're hearing is probably in the samples on that one. And yeah, I apologize. I can't be more specific on that. The / one is definitely, there's definitely a kick / snare mic on that. I recorded those drums, and there's multiple mics. For that type of recording, I was doing a lot of mics to capture the kick drum sound. So there's kick / snare, and that gets that kind of knocky attack, and then there's a mic on the resonant side of the drum, and then there's a mic further away that I sort of gate a little bit that captures the drum in the room a bit more. And then, of course, there's the sound of the drum in the room mics as well. But there's a couple tricks for capturing that roominess, so you're really hearing more, not this like really, your head inside the kick drum sound, which I've never really been much of a fan of. I like having the mics on the outside of the drum. If you take the mic that's on the outside of the drum, and even if it's just a couple feet away, and figure out how to isolate a little bit, I'll use some baffles to try and minimize how much of the cymbals are getting into that mic, strategically placed, just between that microphone and whatever crash cymbals are around, so I can try and get as much kick drum in that microphone as possible, and as little cymbals in there as possible, so I can really mash it with compression, usually like an 1176 compressor. The 1176 will add distortion and compression all at once, and it just brings out all of that ambience, and you just blend it in a little bit with the sort of main sound of the drum, and all of a sudden you'll hear all of that space around the kick drum. It's a really, really good trick as sort of like a parallel type processing of it. And then I can sort of manage the level of it. If he's bashing on a lot of cymbals, I can tuck it back a little bit. If there's a bunch of cymbals, if he's crash riding or something, you probably won't hear as much of the ambience on the kick drum anyways. And so bring it up in the places where there's room for it. And then, you hear how the drum sounded in the room more. It's a really cool trick for that. So it's multiple sources, surrounding the kick drum. I'm obsessed with kick drum sounds. It's just sort of like the foundation that you build the whole mix on. So I put a lot of effort into that. So there's usually at least 3 or 4 sources that are adding up in order to create that sound and create that sort of dimension around it. So yeah, there you go. There's a good question. So I think that's probably a good place to stop. We got another good chunk of questions in there, and I will. I'm going to do a bunch of stuff this week, and so I'll be able to get some more stuff that where we're really digging in and looking at specifically how stuff was done. So there you go. Thanks for checking it out, and I will see you next time. Bye.
You put the whoosy on the whatsy, attach the whatsy to the whoosy, connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit go. You hook the gidget to the gadget, adjust the gadget to the gidget, unhook the dingley-dang from the diddly-doo.